May 1945. Europe was celebrating. In the streets of London, Paris, and Moscow, ecstatic crowds marked the end of a 6-year nightmare. The 1,000-year Reich had turned to ash. The world, or at least half of it, breathed a collective sigh of relief. But on the other side of the globe, in the vast, suffocating theater of the Pacific, the war raged on. For the men fighting there, victory in Europe seemed like news from a distant planet. The Japanese war machine, though mortally wounded, refused to die. This was the Forgotten War, a series of brutal island-by-island, swamp-by-swamp campaigns fought by men whom history seemed eager to leave behind. And for the soldiers of the Australian 7th Division, the legendary Silent Seventh, there were no parades. There was only the next objective, their destination, Balikpapan, a strategic port on the east coast of Borneo. Operation Obo II, the prize was oil. Before the war, Balikpapan was one of the jewels of the Dutch East Indies, a complex of refineries that fueled an empire. Now it was in ruins, sabotaged by the Japanese themselves, but control of the area was vital. The Japanese defenders, elements of the 454th Independent Infantry Battalion, and Naval Guard units under the command of Admiral Mikiaki Kamada, knew there was no hope. They were cut off without naval or air support and with no chance of rescue. Their order was simple and absolute: fight to the last man, inflict maximum pain, turn every yard of advance into a nightmare. To this end, they had spent months transforming the terrain. The hills surrounding the port, codenamed Parramatta, Vasey, and Milford, were no longer geographical features. They were fortresses. The Japanese had dug into the earth, creating a complex, interconnected, and mutually supporting system of bunkers. These were not simple foxholes. They were deep, masterfully camouflaged positions, built with jungle hardwood logs, oil drums filled with concrete, and, most importantly, armored steel plates torn from the ruined refineries. Each housed Nambu heavy machine guns, knee mortars, or elite riflemen. And each had a field of fire that covered the approaches to its neighbors. It was a spider's web of steel and fire, designed for a single purpose: to bleed the attackers dry. It is on this grim chessboard that our story unfolds. It is not a story of generals moving pins on a map. It is the story of a small group of men tasked with an almost impossible job. And at its center is an Australian infantryman, a digger. He was not an officer, perhaps a corporal or a seasoned private. He was not a hero in the cinematic sense. He was tired. His skin was marked by insect bites and the humid heat that turned his jungle green uniform into a dark, heavy rag. He had already seen the worst the war could offer, perhaps on the sands of Tobruk or the muddy tracks of Kokoda. The 7th Division was made of hardened veterans, and he had a job to do. His platoon's objective was a stretch of ridge, and that ridge was defended by this network of death. For this kind of work, the primary tool was fire. The Australians had a powerful asset, the Matilda frog tank, a modified variant that threw a huge jet of flame. But the frogs had limits. The terrain was too steep, the jungle too dense. The tracks were minefields. When the armor bogged down or was neutralized, the job fell, as it always does, to the infantry. And this is where the digger's most vital and most vulnerable support element comes in: a two-man portable flamethrower team. We must pause to understand what this means. The flamethrower, likely an American-supplied M2 model, was a terrible weapon. It weighed over 70 pounds. One man, the operator, carried the tanks on his back, 2 cylinders of jellied gasoline, napalm, and a smaller cylinder of pressurized nitrogen to propel the fuel. The second man was the assistant, carrying spare cylinders, a rifle, and providing close protection. To carry this weapon was to paint yourself as the #1 priority target on the entire battlefield. The enemy knew what this weapon could do, and they would concentrate every ounce of firepower they had to stop it. The effective range was short. On a good day, maybe 30 or 40 yards. In practice, it was 20. This meant that to use it, the team had to crawl under fire until they were practically face to face with the bunker's opening. Our digger was their shepherd. His job was to get them there. He was the team leader, the coordinator. His life depended on them, and their lives depended absolutely on him and the rest of his section. The Bren Light machine gunner who would provide the covering fire, and the rifleman who would watch the flanks and the connecting spider holes. The battle for Balikpapan began on July 1, 1945. After one of the heaviest naval and aerial bombardments of the entire Pacific War, the 7th Division hit the beaches. The initial landing, to everyone's surprise, met light resistance, but the Australians, veterans as they were, knew this was just the prelude. The real fight was not on the sand, it was in the hills. As our diggers' unit moved inland, they hit Parramatta Ridge, and the world dissolved. The air filled with the dry, rapid-fire sound of Nambu machine guns, the dull whoops of mortars, and the sharp crack of Arisaka rifles. The advance stopped cold. The platoon sergeant pointed. A bunker, dug into the hillside, its firing aperture nearly invisible, was pinning them down. It was the first of many. The digger nodded. He gathered his section. The plan was always the same, a grim, terrifying ballet. The Bren gunner, a burly man with a mustache, found a position. He needed a clear angle to the aperture. He opened the bipod, lay down in the mud, and took aim. The digger and the two-man flamethrower team began to move. They crawled. The air was so humid it felt like breathing water. The ground was a red mud slurry. Bullets snapped over their heads, cutting leaves from the branches above. The digger kept his eyes on the bunker. He was looking for the machine gun's rhythm, the brief moments it paused to reload or shift targets. "Now," he hissed. The Bren opened up, a steady, rhythmic thump, 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 pouring 303 caliber rounds at the dark slit. This forced the Japanese gunner to keep his head down or shift his fire. The flame team rushed a few yards, hunched over, and dived back into the mud. They were closer now, 25 yards. The assistant, Sparrow, readied the weapon, while the operator, Tiny, held the wand. They were terrifyingly exposed. The digger crawled up beside them, his own Lee-Enfield rifle cracking, aiming not to strike, but to suppress. Again! Another rush, another slide into the dirt, 15 yards. They could smell the smokeless powder from the bunker. The digger pulled the pin on a smoke grenade and lobbed it. It landed a bit short, but its thick white smoke billowed up, creating a precious, fleeting veil. "Tiny, hit it!" the digger yelled. The man called Tiny stood, or perhaps just kneeled. He aimed the wand. The assistant squeezed the rear grip, and Tiny pulled the front trigger. A sound unlike any other, a deep roaring whoosh, erupted as the pressurized gas ignited the napalm. A thick, orange torrent of liquid fire shot from the wand and slammed squarely into the bunker's narrow opening. The jet of flame found its way inside, adhering to the timber walls, the ammunition boxes, and the men within. The sound of the machine gun ceased instantly. It was replaced by a muffled, terrible sound and the smell of scorching earth and something else. Something acrid and awful that turned the stomach. The flame cut off. The digger and his team stayed low, panting, the heat shimmering in the air before them. "Is it clear?" Sparrow whispered. The digger watched. No movement, no more gunfire. "Check it," he ordered. This was the grim finale. He and another rifleman advanced in a rush, grenades, persuaders, they called them, in hand. They tossed them into the opening just to be sure. The concussion shook the ground. Then a quick look inside. The position was neutralized. The occupants had been silenced. One bunker down. The digger waved the rest of the platoon forward. They gained another 50 hard-fought yards. And then another stream of fire erupted from their right flank. Another bunker, one they hadn't seen, likely connected by a tunnel. The entire process began again. The bren, the crawl, the covering fire, the smoke, the whoosh of the flame, the persuaders, the grim check. This was day one. The platoon fought for hours, measuring their progress in yards. By the end of that exhausting day, the digger, his rifle section, and that same exhausted two-man flamethrower team had cleared 8 bunkers, 8. The flame team had to return to the rear line twice to replenish their tanks. It was a dangerous trek, each man aware that their precious weapon was now empty and useless. The digger had watched them go, feeling naked without them, relying only on his rifle and grenades against fortified machine guns. When they returned, lugging the refilled 70-pound pack, the grim work resumed. Day 2 dawned with no respite. The objective was the crest of the ridge. The Japanese positions here were thicker. It was clear the enemy had anticipated this exact line of attack. The frog tanks were called up, but the terrain was treacherous. One of them hit an anti-tank mine, blocking the narrow track. The job fell back to the infantry. Our diggers unit was again at the tip of the spear. The flame team, Tiny and Sparrow, looked pale beneath their grime and sweat. Their movements were heavy, burdened not just by the weight of the equipment, but by the sheer psychological load of what they were doing. They were the focus of all the hate. The digger knew his primary job was to keep them alive. They were his key. Without them, his section would be cut to pieces by the Nambus. A particularly stubborn position held them up for nearly an afternoon. It was a concrete reinforced pillbox, strengthened with the refinery steel. The flamethrower couldn't get the right angle. The first burst of fire just splashed off the concrete front, harmlessly. The Japanese gunner inside must have felt invincible. He raked the ground in front, and Sparrow yelped as a bullet tore through his pack, missing his body by inches. They pulled back, sliding into a crater. The digger was furious, but calm. "He's too deep," he told the Bren gunner. "Keep him busy. Make him think we're coming from the front." This time the digger took a different approach. He crawled alone on a wide flank, using a drainage ditch for cover. The ditch was filled with stagnant water and debris. It took him an agonizing 20 minutes to move 30 yards. He was now at a 90-degree angle to the bunker. He could see something that wasn't visible from the front, a narrow ventilation shaft, or perhaps a secondary communication trench on the side. He signaled. The Bren gunner, seeing his sign, opened up heavy fire on the main aperture, drawing all the enemy's attention. The digger pulled the pin on a grenade. He didn't throw it immediately. He counted. 1, 2. He lobbed it. The timing was perfect. The grenade flew in a short arc and dropped directly into the side opening. A deep, muffled thump. The Nambu machine gun stopped, but he wasn't done. "Tiny! Now! The front!" he roared. The flamethrower team, seeing their chance, didn't need to crawl. They ran. From 10 yards out, Tiny drenched the main aperture. The jet of flame went inside this time, finding the breach the grenade had made. A secondary event happened inside. Ammunition, perhaps. The bunker shuddered violently. It was silenced for good. They didn't just clear bunkers, they cleared trench systems. They cleared spider holes, one-man pits covered by a camouflaged wooden lid from which a Japanese soldier could emerge behind them. The digger nearly fell into one. A Japanese soldier emerged with an explosive charge on a bamboo pole. The assistant Sparrow, who was covering their rear, reacted first. The combat was in seconds, in inches. The digger, the Bren gunner, the rifleman, and the 2 men with the fire. They became a machine. A tired, dirty human machine, but a brutally effective one. The digger identified the target. The Bren provided the base of fire. The flame team moved. The digger moved with them, his rifle cracking, protecting their blind spots. The fire was applied. The riflemen secured the position. And they did this again, and again, and again. By the end of day 2, the crest of the ridge was nearly theirs. The section was beyond exhausted. They hadn't slept in 48 hours. They ate cold rations while crouched in a mortar hole. Tiny's shoulders were raw from the pack straps. His hands were shaking. Sparrow had a hole in his pack and a new haunted look in his eyes. They had cleared, by their platoon's count, another 20 positions. The cost was high. 2 men from the supporting rifle section were gone, hit by a mortar that had zeroed in on the Bren's position. But the digger and his 2-man flamethrower team were still operational, still together. Day 3, the final push. They were moving off Parramatta and on to the next feature, Milford. The Japanese forces here were broken, but no less determined. They were no longer fighting as a cohesive unit, but as isolated pockets of fanatical resistance. This, in some ways, was even more dangerous. There was no front line. The enemy could be anywhere. A bunker hidden beneath a seemingly innocent hut opened up, catching the platoon in the open. Men dove for cover. The digger didn't even wait for orders. He, Tiny, and Sparrow were already moving, using the lessons of the past 48 hours. They moved fluidly, like a single organism. The digger pointed. The new Bren gunner, nervous but steady, understood and fired. Crawl, rush, smoke, whoosh. The hut vanished in a blossom of fire. Another position, this time in a storm drain. Crawl, rush, smoke, whoosh. Another in a cluster of rocks. Whoosh. Another dug into the bank of a road. Whoosh. It became a relentless, horrifying rhythm. The digger was the conductor of this small orchestra of destruction. He was numb to it. This was no longer war. It was extermination. It was a job. Identify the problem. Apply the solution. Move to the next problem. By the evening of the 3rd day, the platoon stood on its objective. They looked back over the ground they had taken. It was a scarred, scorched, smoking landscape. The fight for Balikpapan would continue for weeks, but for this small sector, the backbone of the Japanese defense was broken. The company commander came by, tallying the reports. The digger, cleaning his Lee Enfield rifle, his hands black with carbon and dirt, gave his report. His platoon sector, the resistance, the methods used. The numbers were staggering. In that 3-day period, that one digger coordinating his section had relied on the same 2-man flamethrower team to neutralize position after position. The final count for his section's area of operations was nearly 50. 50 individual, fortified positions, 50 machine gun nests, rifle pits, and mortar posts. 50 times that 2-man team had crawled forward. 50 times they had faced concentrated fire. 50 times they had stood up and unleashed the fire. And 50 times they had survived. The digger, whose name is lost to history like so many of his comrades, was simply the Australian digger. He was the embodiment of the resilience, the grim professionalism, and the sheer courage of the 7th Division. The war ended just a few weeks later. While the diggers were still clearing the final pockets of resistance in the Borneo jungle, bombs of a new and terrible kind fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world changed forever. The Borneo campaign, for which so much blood was spilled, was rendered strategically irrelevant almost before it was over. It became a footnote, part of the forgotten war. But for the men who were there, for the digger who directed the fire, and for Tiny and Sparrow, the 2 men who carried that terrible 70-pound burden, it was not a footnote. It was 3 days in hell. It was a relentless, minute-by-minute struggle for survival, fought with skill, with courage, and with a weapon that remains one of the most terrifying ever fielded in combat. The story of that digger and his team is not one of glory. There are no statues for clearing bunkers. It is a story of a grim task, professionally done under the worst conditions imaginable. It is a testament to the cold bravery required to walk into the face of certain fire, to protect your mates, and to do the job no matter how terrible, until it was finished.